The smell of burnt coffee and caramelized onions clung to Michael like a second skin, a familiar perfume that carried the memory of his father. He was cleaning the last table at El Palacio, sweat trickling down his forehead under the flickering fluorescent lights. His hands, calloused and rough from constant work, trembled slightly as he aligned the silverware. It was almost a dance, a silent ritual that connected him to the memory of the man who had taught him to appreciate the subtle flavors of life, even amidst poverty. His father, Raphael, a cook with a generous soul and an easy smile, had passed away 6 months ago, taking with him the intoxicating aroma of his dishes and the joy that infected everyone who knew him. The kitchen, once the pulsating heart of the family, was now an empty space, echoing the silence of longing. Michael felt the weight of his absence like a stone in his chest with every bite of rice and beans he ate, every penny he saved to support his mother. The small table in the kitchen where they had dined so many times, under the dim light of a single bulb, was set with an impeccable white tablecloth. He had never used it, keeping it as if it were a piece of his father's smile. The image of the empty table now overlaid his tired vision of the nearly deserted restaurant. El Palacio was his fortress, a temporary refuge from pain. Each dish he served, each forced smile for the customers, was a small battle won against despair. He worked hard, more than any other waiter, seeking in physical exhaustion an escape from the anguish that gnawed at him. But the night was still young, and loneliness an uncomfortable and persistent companion. The silence of the kitchen was so profound that Michael could hear the slow tick-tock of the clock on the wall, each second another nail in his coffin of sadness. Loneliness was an almost physical weight, a damp blanket wrapping him in its icy embrace. He remembered the warmth of his father's hugs, the strong scent of his lavender cologne mixed with the gentle aroma of his dishes. The few remaining customers said their goodbyes, leaving behind a trail of crumbs and hushed conversations. Michael felt emptied, his soul as dry as a desert. The sound of the door opening made him flinch, a sudden start that pulled him from his sea of memories. It was the manager, his face bearing an expression Michael knew well, apprehension. "Michael," the manager whispered, "Mrs. Martinez has arrived." The name, pronounced with a tone of reverence mixed with fear, chilled Michael's blood. Carmen Martinez, the Empress as she was known, was a living legend at El Palacio. A wealthy, demanding woman with an explosive temper, capable of turning any waiter's day into a true inferno. All the other waiters dodged her like a plague, leaving her in the care of the most inexperienced or the most unfortunate. And today, that unfortunate was him. A cold wave of fear washed over him, but before he could even breathe, a tightness gripped his heart. He was no longer the boy who had lost his father, but the man who needed to support his mother. He took a deep breath, straightening his shoulders. The pain was still there, but it wouldn't paralyze him. He would face the Empress, not out of bravery, but out of necessity. After all, the worst had already happened, and he had survived. The image of Carmen, an imposing and elegant figure, arose in his mind, and with it, a strange sensation, a mixture of fear and challenge. A spark of rebellion, as small as a candle flame, ignited in his chest. He would serve the Empress. And who knows, maybe he would survive this too. The bronze bell above the door chimed, announcing her arrival. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen, breaking the frantic rhythm of dinner preparation. The other waiters, pale faces under the flickering light of the lamps, stopped their tasks, eyes fixed on the majestic entrance of El Palacio restaurant. Even the chef, a corpulent man with a thick, temperamental mustache, interrupted a heated argument with a helper to observe. The Empress had arrived. Michael felt a knot form in his stomach. He had prepared for this moment, taking deep breaths several times, trying to calm the storm raging inside him. The memory of his father, of his calloused hands preparing delicious dishes, gave him some strength. But the fear was still there, a persistent shadow that had accompanied him since his father's death, a fear that transcended the simple apprehension of serving a demanding customer. It was the fear of rejection, the fear of not being up to the task, the fear of failure. Carmen Martinez entered, a whirlwind of silk and expensive perfume. Her gaze, cold and calculating, swept the room, resting on each of the waiters with a weight that seemed to crush their bones. The aura of power surrounding her was palpable, terrifying. A deathly silence filled the room, broken only by the soft hum of the lights and the sound of Michael's own breath, which had become loud and gasping in his ears. He felt cold sweat trickling down his temples. The manager, a woman with a tired face and tense expression, approached Michael with an expression of explicit terror on her face. "Michael, you're going to serve her," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "You're the only one who hasn't had a negative experience with her. Try to be as patient as possible." Michael nodded, unable to utter a word. He felt the weight of everyone's gaze on him, a mixture of expectation, fear, and perhaps a hint of hope. The hope that he could somehow surprise himself and everyone else. With an almost robotic movement, Michael approached Carmen. His heart beat strongly against his ribs, but he tried to maintain an upright posture, his voice firm. "For good evening, madam. What would you like to order?" The question came out drier than he intended, but Carmen simply stared at him, a look that seemed to pierce his soul. She studied the menu with glacial slowness, each gesture laden with an almost insulting arrogance. Finally, she looked up, her dark, piercing eyes resting on Michael. "I'll have a simple consommé," she said, her voice soft but laced with irony. "But it must be perfect, flawless." "Understand." The order was simple, even trivial, but the tone, the intensity of her gaze transformed it into a challenge that Michael knew he needed to overcome, not only to keep his job, but also to prove to himself that he was capable of overcoming his insecurities. The memory of his father, his kind smile and his agile hands preparing wonderful dishes, flooded him again, this time as a source of strength. "Yes, ma'am," Michael replied, his voice now firm, without a tremor. "It will be a perfect consommé." He felt a glimmer of hope, a spark of courage that propelled him. This wasn't just a matter of serving a demanding customer. It was a battle against his own demons, and he was ready to fight. The Empress had challenged him, and for the first time in a long time he tasted the fight, not as an imminent defeat but as a chance of victory. The manager's almost imperceptible smile, full of relief, confirmed his intention. Carmen watched him, her lips curved in an almost smile, a smile that didn't reach her cold, piercing eyes but which, for Michael, was a sign that the battle had begun, and that the Empress, perhaps, wasn't as implacable as she seemed. And that possibility, that small spark of hope, was enough to revive his weary heart. The worst was over. Or was it? The aroma of freshly brewed coffee battled the intense smell of garlic and herbs hanging in the air, a peculiar symphony only El Palacio could orchestrate. Michael, feeling the comforting familiarity of the kitchen, wiped a stubborn stain from the marble surface. Carmen's almost imperceptible smile, the spark of hope, still warmed him from within, but a strange unease gnawed at his insides. It was as if an invisible thread bound him to her, but with each attempt to draw closer, an abyss of uncertainty opened. The night unfolded in a whirlwind of orders. Carmen watched him from her usual table, a privileged stage to appreciate his silent dance between the precision of his movements and the elegance of his posture. He didn't allow himself to look directly at her, but he felt the weight of her gaze like a second skin. Each dish he served her was a challenge, a test of his ability, an attempt to achieve the approval contained in her dark, impenetrable eyes. He surpassed himself. He invented flavor combinations he didn't even know he possessed. A grilled snapper with sweet potato puree and a touch of Sicilian lemon, followed by lavender and honey ice cream. Each dish was a small masterpiece, a silent melody dedicated to that enigmatic woman. And then came the order that stopped him. It wasn't a sophisticated dish, nor anything extraordinary on the menu. It was simple, almost banal, a tomato consommé. But the order was accompanied by a look that broke the impenetrable fortress Carmen had built around herself, a look that contained a myriad of emotions, a whirlwind of regret, curiosity, perhaps even fear. Michael felt his heart accelerate. Preparing the consommé became an almost ritualistic task. Each step, each movement, was charged with an expectation that left him breathless. He remembered his father, his calloused hands preparing magical broths, his culinary secrets whispered. The memories were as sharp as the blade of the knife slicing the ripe tomatoes. The consommé was ready, its vibrant color a reflection of Michael's own emotional turmoil. He took it to Carmen's table, his hands slightly trembling. He waited, patiently, for her reaction. She looked at him, really looked at him, not with the implacable coldness of before, but with something that resembled admiration. Upon tasting the consommé, her eyes closed for a moment, a long moment charged with meaning. When she opened them, a single tear rolled down her cheek, a tear that broke the ice barrier separating them. "It's perfect," she murmured, her voice hoarse, charged with emotion. "Exactly like my grandfather used to make." Michael felt a lump in his throat. A wave of warmth washed over him, mingling with the newly ignited hope. He had succeeded. He had overcome the challenge, but the price was too high, because The moment Carmen allowed a fraction of her vulnerability to show, Michael realized that his own heart was exposed to an even greater danger, the danger of hope, as overwhelming and fragile as a rose petal in the wind. But before he could say or do anything, before he could take advantage of the opening she had given him, a hurried waiter stumbled, spilling an entire tray of drinks onto Carmen's table, destroying the magic that had blossomed between them. The consommé, now spilled mixed with the remnants of red wine, became a symbol of the fragility of their connection. Carmen, cold again, implacable, stood up, ignoring Michael, and left the restaurant without looking back. The silence that followed was deafening, a silence that echoed his own defeat. The hope, the small flower that had bloomed in his chest, withered quickly, succumbing to the coldness of the missed connection, leaving in its place a raw pain, an emptiness that slowly swallowed him, leaving him alone, immersed in the darkness of disappointment. The door slammed shut, the sound echoing the emptiness that had settled in his chest. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee, usually comforting, was now just a reminder of the fleeting nature of good things. The weight of loneliness settled in, heavy as an anchor, dragging him to the depths of disillusionment. He looked at his hands, trembling slightly, his nails digging into the rough skin of his palms. The image of Carmen, impassive, her dark, unreadable eyes, haunted him like a spectre carrying the fragility of a broken promise, the bitterness of a shattered dream. He tried to concentrate on work, an escape that had once brought him relief, but the kitchen, normally his fortress, had become a chamber, echoing his tormented thoughts. Every movement, every chop of the onion, every whir of the blender was accompanied by the incessant rhythm of disappointment, a frantic drum pounding in his ears. The other waiters watched him with a mixture of concern and curiosity. They had witnessed the duel of wills with Carmen, the strange dance between challenge and respect, the palpable tension that permeated the air. Now, they saw only the shadow of the confident waiter, replaced by a dejected young man who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his thin shoulders. Their empathy was silent, a tacit embrace amidst the whirlwind of his emotions. That day, the service was a blur. He moved mechanically, an automaton performing tasks without feeling, without life. Orders arrived, and were fulfilled with precision, but without the usual grace, without the touch of magic he used to impart to each interaction. His smile, once spontaneous and radiant, had vanished, replaced by an empty expression, a reflection of the deep sadness that consumed him. Night fell, bringing with it the darkness that mirrored his soul. While cleaning the table where Carmen had sat, a small piece of paper caught his attention. It was a napkin, slightly crumpled, with elegant and firm handwriting. "You are better than you think, CM." A pang of hope, weak and timid, emerged from the bottom of the well, but it was a fragile hope, vulnerable as a newborn butterfly. He returned to his small rented room, loneliness a heavy cloak enveloping him. The image of his father, preparing his delicious meals, surfaced in his memory. The aroma of rice and beans, the unmistakable scent of the beef stew. A wave of longing hit him, so strong that he felt the lump in his throat, the oppression in his chest. The tears, held back for so long, finally found their way to freedom, silently streaming down his face. In that moment of fragility, of profound pain, he made a promise to himself. He would not let disappointment suffocate him. He would not allow the shadow of rejection to extinguish the flame of his ambition. Carmen might have turned her back on him, but he would not do the same to his dreams. He would find strength in the memory of his father, in the remembrance of his smile, in the certainty that that man, even in his physical absence, would guide him towards overcoming. He had been defeated that day, yes, but defeat would not be his end. It was just another ingredient in the recipe of his life, a bitter ingredient, but necessary to give flavor to the journey towards success. The next day he would return to El Palacio, not to win back Carmen, but to win back himself. Work would become his armor, his way of fighting against the loneliness and pain that still haunted him. A new challenge presented itself, and he was ready to face it. The flame of resilience was slowly igniting, hesitant but firm, and he knew deep down that the flame would not be extinguished again. The smell of freshly brewed coffee, that comforting aroma that used to bring him peace, now only reminded him of the loneliness that enveloped him like a heavy cloak. Michael worked at a frantic, almost mechanical pace. Every movement, every precise chop of the onion, every firm slap of the steak on the griddle was a silent mantra that kept him away from the pain throbbing in his chest. The image of Carmen, cold and distant, overshadowed the memory of his father's warm smile, creating a painful dissonance within him. He moved between the tables like a ghost, fulfilling orders with an implacable efficiency that surprised even the other waiters. His hands, which once trembled before the Empress, now danced with millimeter precision, performing a silent choreography of movements rehearsed over years of struggle. He didn't think, he just did. It was a way to anesthetize the open wound in his soul. But the memory of Carmen's gaze, the defiant gleam in her eyes, seeped into his concentration, like a drop of water sneaking through a crack in the strongest rock. She had ignored him, rejected him, and the rejection was a sharp knife cutting him to pieces. He felt the weight of every unspoken word, every unreturned gesture, pressing down on him. With each impeccably served dish, he built a wall of ice around himself, a wall that protected him from the world, from the pain, and, paradoxically, from Carmen. That day, however, inspiration came from an unexpected place. While cleaning up the leftovers from a plate of potatoes, a purple potato caught his attention, its dark, shiny skin contrasting with the paleness of his own. He remembered his father, his ability to transform simple ingredients into culinary masterpieces, how he used to use leftovers to create magical dishes full of flavor and love. An idea arose in his mind, a clear and sharp vision, like a star in a dark night. He picked up the potato, peeled it carefully, his movements slow and precise like those of an artisan working on a piece of art. In his mind, he saw his father smiling, approving his work. He remembered the recipe for a mashed potato with fine herbs that his father made on special occasions, a recipe he himself had never mastered. But at that moment, something changed. He wasn't just following a recipe, he was creating something new, something unique, something that carried his father's essence, the essence of his soul. Using purple potatoes as a base, he created a delicate and creamy mash, sprinkled with fresh herbs and a subtle touch of rosemary, a scent that brought him vivid memories of his father's garden. He added a touch of extra virgin olive oil, an ingredient his father used sparingly, valuing its quality and flavor. Around the mash, he built a structure of grilled vegetables, a rainbow of colors and flavors that reflected the complexity of his own emotions. It was a simple dish but full of meaning, a reflection of his pain, his struggle, and above all his resilience. He finished the dish, feeling a strange emptiness mixed with a deep sense of satisfaction. It was as if, through cooking, he had found a way to talk to his father, to express his longing, his pain, his admiration. He placed the dish on the table, and the simple elegance, the subtle refinement, caught the attention of the other waiters. Across the room, Carmen watched. Her dark eyes, previously full of coldness and disdain, now reflected a hesitant curiosity. She had witnessed the metamorphosis in Michael, the transformation from an insecure waiter into a culinary artist, and she felt, deep down, that dish, that simple mashed potato dish, contained something more than just ingredients. It contained a story of struggle, perseverance, and love. And that story, she knew, was just beginning. The silence between them was denser than any storm. Carmen, seated at a corner table, watched Michael with an intensity that left him disconcerted. The weak, late afternoon light painted long shadows on her face, accentuating the fine lines around her eyes, lines etched by experience, time, and pain. The soft aroma of the mashed potatoes, still present in the air, was a poignant reminder of the past, a link between the memory of Michael's father and the uncertain present. He approached, hesitant, the empty tray in his hands seeming to weigh tons. The weight wasn't just physical, it was the weight of expectation, uncertainty, fear. The distance between them, previously an impenetrable wall, now seemed an abyss, separating two solitary shipwrecks. I wanted to know if the dish was good, Michael managed to stammer, his voice hoarse, dry as the throat that choked him. His hands trembled slightly, and he struggled to maintain eye contact with those deep eyes, which seemed to hold a universe of secrets and suffering. Carmen took a deep breath, a long sigh that seemed to break the tension in the air. She picked up the linen napkin, folding and unfolding it with slow, precise movements, as if each gesture were a battle against an invisible enemy. He was different, she said finally, her voice low and raspy like dry leaves swept by the wind. The word different carried no judgment, but a profound admiration. He was charged. Michael felt a lump form in his throat. He knew she wasn't just talking about the taste of the puree, she was talking about the soul he had poured into it, the pain and longing that had been transmuted into culinary art. Cooking, once merely a means of survival, had become his form of expression, his way of exorcising the ghosts of the past. Carmen lifted her head, and for the first time, Michael saw a crack in the impenetrable armor she wore as a shield. A single tear traced a glistening path down her pale cheek. It was a tear of loneliness, of vulnerability, of a deep ancestral fear that had haunted her for years. "I challenged you," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I tested you, put you against the wall, because I was afraid." Silence hung between them again, but now it was a different silence. It was a shared silence, a silence that allowed the unspoken words, the repressed emotions, to speak louder than any eloquent statement. "Afraid of what?" Michael asked, his voice still low but firm. He felt a deep compassion for her, an empathy that transcended professional admiration and approached human understanding. "Afraid of connection," she replied, her voice almost a whisper. "Afraid of getting close to people, of letting myself be vulnerable. I built these walls around me, this armor, to protect myself, but they also imprisoned me." Her words were like knives, cutting through the darkness surrounding them, revealing the raw truth that existed behind the imposing facade of the Empress. It was the truth of a lonely woman, deeply wounded, seeking, without knowing how, a genuine connection with the world. And in that moment, in that space charged with raw emotions and exposed vulnerability, Michael realized he wasn't just a waiter serving a demanding customer. He was facing a lost soul, searching for a safe harbor. He was facing a woman who, behind her arrogance and coldness, carried a pain as deep as his own. "I built my walls too," Michael confessed, his voice choked with emotion. "But your dish, your challenge, broke down some of them." It was at that moment that Carmen allowed herself to cry without shame, without reservation, letting the tears cleanse the wounds of her soul. And in that moment, Michael realized that he had not only broken down Carmen's defenses, but his own as well. The fear of rejection, the fear of loneliness, the pain of losing his father, all of it seemed less oppressive now, faced with the fragility and raw honesty of the woman before him. The future, once an uncertain and tempestuous sea, now seemed a little clearer. The storm had passed, revealing a new and promising horizon, a future that perhaps could be shared, a future that perhaps could be sweet. But the weight of the next battle, the next threat, still hung in the air, invisible but palpable, like a premonition of something terrible to come. The cool night air, once a comforting balm, was now just a reminder of life's immense fragility. Carmen's confession, her vulnerability exposed like an open wound, had created an empty space, a profound silence that echoed within Michael's chest. A silence now filled by the rumble of distant thunder, heralding an approaching storm with relentless fury. He watched her, seated before him, the dim streetlight bathing her delicate features, revealing a deep sadness in her dark eyes. The image of the strong and implacable woman he knew had dissolved, giving way to a fragile, almost transparent figure, and the feeling of protection, of wanting to wrap her in a hug and shield her from all the world's pain, completely overwhelmed him. But the storm arrived sooner than he expected, not as distant thunder but as a gale that tossed everything in its path. A court summons, delivered the following morning, destroyed the fragile peace that had settled between them. El Palacio restaurant, the stage of their battles and their nascent romance, was being evicted. The owner, a ruthless man, accepted no excuses. The debt, accumulated over the years, was overdue. It was the end. Michael's world crumbled. The news hit him like a punch to the stomach. The strength that had kept him standing, the resilience that had carried him this far, now seemed to evaporate like smoke in a frigid wind. He felt the icy dread of poverty and insecurity enveloping him like a cloak. His mother, his home, his dreams, everything was at risk. And worse, the promise of a future with Carmen, the sweet hope that had blossomed amidst the storm, now seemed as ephemeral as vapor itself. Michael's hands trembled as he read and reread the document's implacable words. With each line, a new wave of despair washed over him. His vision blurred, the letters transforming into indistinct smudges. He felt a tightness in his chest, a physical pain that reflected the deep ache tearing at his soul. The feeling of failure, of powerlessness, was overwhelming. Carmen, watching his reaction with a mixture of fear and compassion, slowly approached. Her voice, normally firm and imposing, came out as a whisper, laden with a fragility that left him even more distressed. "Michael, we'll figure this out," she said, her hand resting lightly on his. "Together." But the words, though laden with love and support, felt empty to him. How could there be a solution? How could he overcome this insurmountable obstacle? The hope, which had been reborn with the promise of a shared future, now flickered out like a candle in a violent storm. He looked at her, His eyes filled with a pain so intense it made her recoil. That look wasn't anger nor sadness, but a despair so profound it paralyzed her. It was the first time he had felt truly defeated, crushed by the weight of a cruel and implacable fate. The future, which had once seemed promising, was now a bottomless abyss, and the possibility of losing everything, including Carmen, was too painful to bear. The feeling of loneliness, so familiar and so feared, returned to haunt him with all its force. He felt lost, adrift in a sea of anguish, without a safe harbor to cling to, without a light at the end of the tunnel. Guilt, sharp as a knife, tore him apart. He had failed. He had failed his mother, Carmen, himself, and in this overwhelming darkness, the idea of giving up, of simply surrendering to the pain, seemed the only plausible option, the only way out. He closed his eyes and a single tear rolled down his face, a reflection of the storm that ravaged his soul. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with a despair so profound it seemed to suffocate him. The future, once painted in vibrant colors, was now a monochromatic painting, dominated by the deep black of hopelessness. And he wondered, there, in that moment of extreme fragility, if he would have the strength to paint a new picture, or if this would be his final canvas. A black canvas, where the only visible color would be that of his pain. The rain outside beat against the windows like a funeral lament, echoing the storm raging in his chest. Michael felt the cold dampness of the night clinging to his skin, a reflection of the coldness that enveloped him. The threat of losing everything, his mother, his hope for a better future, was an unbearable weight. He looked at his hands, calloused and dirty, yet capable of creating wonders in the kitchen, and felt a lump in his throat. That restaurant, that dream, seemed to be dissipating like smoke in the wind. He had delved deep within himself, seeking the strength of his father, the resilience he had taught him, but the darkness seemed so deep, so overwhelming. The image of Carmen's face, pale and worried, floated in his thoughts, mingling with the memory of his own reflection in the mirror, tired, defeated. Then, a light touch on his shoulder. He turned, meeting Carmen's eyes, filled with a compassion that struck him like a ray of sunshine in the midst of the storm. It wasn't the implacable empress who had challenged him, but a vulnerable woman, her eyes swollen and her face etched with anguish. She seemed so fragile, so exposed, that Michael felt an irresistible urge to protect her. "Michael," she whispered, her voice hoarse with contained emotion. I need to tell you something." The silence that followed was thick with expectation, dense and heavy like the air before a storm. Michael waited, his heart pounding in his chest, a whirlwind of emotions hitting him with the force of a wave. He smelled the freshly brewed coffee coming from the kitchen, a comforting aroma amidst the suffocating anguish. The sound of the rain against the window was a sad melody, but somehow it eased the pressure on his chest. Carmen took a deep breath, as if gathering strength to face an invisible enemy. "I challenged you, not out of pleasure, but out of fear," she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "Fear of connecting with someone, fear of being hurt again. You showed me something I had forgotten, the beauty of simplicity, the strength of resilience, and the magic that exists in a simple dish made with love and passion." She moved closer, her fingers lightly touching his. The physical contact was an electric shock, running through his entire body, warming him from within. He felt the fragility of her hands, the firmness of her gaze. It was a look that transcended the mask of coldness she usually wore, revealing a wounded soul, but also one capable of deep love. "Your dish, that dish you made with your father's recipe, it touched me deeply. It reminded me of my own past, of my own loss," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "I saw your pain there, your strength, your ability to transform pain into something beautiful, and I fell in love with that." Her words were like a balm to his wounded soul. The confession, so unexpected, so sincere, flooded him with a wave of relief and hope. He wasn't just a talented waiter, but a man capable of inspiring love, capable of touching the soul of someone as closed off as Carmen. Tears streamed down Michael's face, but they were tears of joy, of liberation. He embraced her, feeling the warmth of her body, the soft scent of her hair, the rapid beating of her heart. In that embrace, he found not only solace, but the confirmation that his painful journey had been worthwhile, that the resilience, the strength he had found in the ashes of loss had led him to her, to such a deep and unexpected love. "I too," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I too fell in love with you, Carmen." The rain outside had lessened, and a ray of moonlight pierced the clouds, illuminating their faces bathed in tears and smiles. In the silence that followed, a silence filled with hope, Carmen smiled, a smile so radiant it lit up the entire room, a smile promising a bright future, a future where Dulce Encuentro would be just the beginning of a long and happy love story. "Let's build our empire together, Michael," she said, her voice firm and full of conviction. "Together we'll create something unforgettable." And Michael, looking into Carmen's eyes, knew this was only the beginning of an even more extraordinary journey, a journey built on the foundations of overcome pain, resilience forged in the flames of suffering, and above all, the love that had blossomed amidst the storm. A love capable of transforming darkness into light, pain into hope, and loneliness into a sweet and unforgettable encounter. But deep down, a small fear still haunted him, a premonition of something yet to come, something that could threaten their newfound happiness. The aroma of freshly ground coffee mingled with the sweet scent of vanilla and cinnamon, an olfactory embrace enveloping Michael like a warm blanket. Dulce Encuentro, his dream come true, pulsed around him, a heart beating strongly, full of life. Soft lights danced on the exposed brick walls, revealing the warmth of the dark wood and the subtle gleam of handcrafted ceramics. Every detail, every corner was a memory, a piece of his journey, his struggle, his victory. And at the center of it all, Carmen. She was impeccable, in a burgundy dress that enhanced the enigmatic beauty of her dark eyes. An almost imperceptible smile played on her lips, a delicate contrast to the strength emanating from her posture. She observed him with an intensity that left him breathless, a silent admiration that transcended words. He felt the weight of her presence, the warmth of her proximity, a weight that didn't crush him, but anchored him, made him whole. The opening night unfolded in a frenzy of contained joy. The laughter of the customers mingled with the clinking of glasses and the soft murmur of conversations. Each dish that came out of the kitchen was an act of love, a celebration of overcoming, a testament to the resilience that had united them. Michael felt the sweat trickle down his forehead, adrenaline pulsing through his veins, but it wasn't the tension of fear that dominated him. It was pure emotion, the delight of sharing his passion with the world, alongside the woman who had transformed his life. In a moment of pause, between preparing a new dish and satisfying a customer, Carmen approached. Her long, delicate fingers lightly touched his arm, sending a tremor that ran through his entire body. The silence between them was thick, laden with meaning. It was a silence that spoke more than any words could express, a silence that breathed complicity, trust, love. "It's all perfect, Michael," she whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion. Her eyes shone with unshed tears, tears reflecting their shared journey, the overcoming of difficulties. The dream realized. He realized then that it wasn't just the restaurant that was perfect. It was the life they had built together, the harmony they found amidst the chaos, the peace they found in love. The fragility which had once frightened him was now a fortress, the vulnerability a bond that united them indissolubly. "It's more than I ever dreamed of," he replied, his voice choked with emotion, the overwhelming feeling rendering him incapable of expressing everything he felt. He looked into her eyes, seeking in them confirmation of the reality surrounding them, the reality of a shared dream, of true love, of a future built from the ashes of the past. She moved closer, the scent of her perfume enveloping him in a delicious haze. Their fingers intertwined, a gentle touch, a simple gesture containing the full force of their love. In the warmth of that magical night, amidst the frenzy of success, they found a moment of quietude, a sacred space for silence charged with love, a silence broken only by the soft music in the background, music that echoed the rhythm of their hearts beating in unison. She smiled, a smile that illuminated her face like a ray of sunshine breaking through the clouds, a smile carrying the promise of a bright future, a future they would build together, brick by brick, as they had built Dulce Encuentro. The restaurant, with its resounding success, was physical proof of their ability to overcome challenges. But the true triumph was the deep connection they had forged, an unbreakable bond woven with threads of resilience, love, and understanding. It was proof that even the darkest storms can give way to a radiant dawn, and that, in the end, love is the sweetest of rewards. But the night was still young, and the symphony of emotions surrounding them promised more unforgettable moments. At that moment, observing the joy in her eyes, Michael felt a shiver run down his spine. It wasn't the fear of the future, but anticipation, the expectation of something even greater, something he felt near, hovering in the air, veiled in mystery and promise. A proposal, perhaps. A new beginning, maybe. The future now was a blank canvas, waiting for them, to be filled with the brushes of passion, love, and eternal happiness, and he knew with a certainty that warmed his heart that this was only the beginning of an even more extraordinary story. The aroma of vanilla and cinnamon, mixed with a subtle hint of dark chocolate, hung in the air, a sweet and comforting embrace that enveloped Michael and Carmen. The dulce encuentro, their shared dream, pulsed around them, a beating heart of light and joy. Customers laughed, chatted, savoring each bite, each sip, as if participating in a sacred ritual. But for Michael and Carmen, the true ritual was happening there in that cozy corner, away from the crowd, under the soft light of a single table lamp. The silence between them was more eloquent than any word. Michael watched Carmen, the light dancing in her dark hair, igniting the amber tones of her eyes. The Empress, the woman of steel, was disarmed, her fortress crumbled, replaced by a vulnerability that filled him with a deep, protective love. He saw the woman behind the mask, the girl who carried in her heart the scars of the past, the marks of a fear that he, with affection, had helped to heal. The soft melody of an Argentinian tango, emanating from the speakers, cradled the moment, creating an intimate atmosphere charged with emotion. Carmen drew abstract designs on her napkin, the pencil tip dancing on the paper as if it were an extension of her thoughts, her desires. He could feel the vibration of her energy, the pulse of her heart. Michael reached out, covering hers on the table, their fingers intertwining delicately. A slight tremor ran through her body, a subtle sign of nervousness, or perhaps of expectation. Her gaze met his, the intensity of the moment reflected in each dilated iris. In her eyes, he saw the reflection of his own soul, a deep and turbulent sea, where happiness and fear danced in an uncertain embrace. "Michael," her voice soft as silk, broke the silence, filling it with the beauty of a whisper. He felt a lump in his throat, emotion choking him. He knew what was coming, but still, a pang of fear, an almost imperceptible hesitation, pierced his heart. The fear of losing the chance to be happy. She took a deep breath, seeking strength within, her eyes, shining with a mixture of love and nervousness, fixed on his. I have never been good at expressing my feelings," she began, her voice slightly trembling, "but I want you to know that you changed my life." Her words, simple, direct, carried the weight of a lifetime, the force of a profound transformation. He felt a wave of warmth wash over him, joy mingling with emotion. Their story, the journey that had led them there, seemed to pass before his eyes like a film. The shadow of his father, poverty, loneliness, all of it now seemed so distant, like a bad dream he had finally overcome. Carmen took a small velvet case from her purse, the same case he had seen on that special night at El Palacio, kept with care. She opened it, revealing a gold ring with a shimmering ruby, a ruby as intense and vibrant as the love that shone in her eyes. "Michael Gonzalez," she said, her voice firm but charged with emotion. "Will you marry me?" The air hung heavy, time stood still. The soft tango music continued in the background, but the only sound Michael could hear was the frantic beat of his own heart. He looked at the ring, at the radiant ruby, at the woman he loved, at the woman who had transformed his life into a fairy tale. And then, his voice choked with emotion, he answered, "Yes." A tear rolled down Carmen's face, a tear of pure happiness, of a relief that freed her from all her bonds, from all her fears. She smiled, a radiant smile, a smile that illuminated the dulce encuentro as if the sun had been born anew. He embraced her, in a strong and tender embrace, feeling her body tremble against his. It was the embrace of love, the embrace of eternal happiness, the embrace of a new beginning. And as they kissed under the complicit gaze of the stars shining in the night sky, Michael knew that this was not just the end of a journey, but the beginning of a new adventure, an even more extraordinary adventure, written with the letters of love, passion, and forever happiness. And in a small corner of his heart, he still tasted his father's recipe, a touch of longing and gratitude mixed with the intense and sweet taste of happiness, the happiness of finally finding his dulce encuentro.